Oh, I love the coziness.
Ralphie murdered a girl and got sympathy. Phil dodged a payment and got beaten. Make that make sense. In The Sopranos, the rules are clear. Until they aren't.
What are you doing? Mikey Palmici's a made guy.
One such rule is the untouchable status of a made man. Put your hands on one, and you'd better be prepared to kiss a ring or a gravestone. Yet somehow, this sacred code seems to shift depending on who's doing the hitting, and more importantly, who's getting hit.
You brought this on yourself with that girl.
Hey, she was a hooah.
Take the now infamous beating of Ralph Cifaretto. Tony's violent reaction after Ralphie brutally killed Tracy, a young woman, a civilian, and barely more than a girl, sparked a ripple of political fallout. Despite the heinousness of Ralphie's act, the real scandal, within mob logic, was that Tony laid hands on a made guy. Cue the panic. Cue the sit-downs.
First Johnny knows about flipping the property by the Esplanade.
Cue Johnny Sack gleefully fanning the flames of inter-family tension. In the eyes of Cosa Nostra etiquette, Ralphie's savagery didn't register as a serious offense, but Tony's reaction sure did. Now contrast that with Phil Leotardo. After dodging Tony's attempts to collect what he was owed, Phil found himself on the receiving end of a savage beatdown, right there on the pavement, fresh out of a car crash of his own making. A crash, fittingly, caused by breaking his own personal code, no eating in the car. And yet, where was the outrage? The formal complaint? The uproar? Silent. Phil gets smacked around, and the world keeps turning. This isn't merely a question of differing levels of guilt, though it's worth noting that Ralphie committed murder, while Phil simply tried to stiff a boss. It's about the optics, the politics, and the convenience of enforcing the rules. Tony striking Ralphie was a public spectacle, witnessed by other made men. That made it impossible to sweep under the rug. Phil's beating, by contrast, was a private humiliation. Telling Johnny Sack about it would have meant admitting that he got blindsided, mid-bite, and dragged out of his car like a debtor on payday. Not exactly the kind of story a prideful capo rushes to share.
This is overdue.
And then there's context. Mikey Palmice got roughed up by Tony early in the series. A minor blip that barely registered because, at the time, Mikey was firmly in the junior camp during an active power struggle. His loyalty was already suspect, and in a world where the next sit-down could be a prelude to a murder plot, a punch in the ribs barely warrants footnote status. So, was there a double standard? Absolutely. But it was a strategic one. The rules are only rigid when they serve someone's agenda.
Tony, it's come to our attention you bought property around Frelinghuysen Avenue.
Ralphie's beating was politically useful for Johnny Sack, who saw an opportunity to wedge his way into Jersey's business and potentially turn Ralphie into a New York asset, especially with Ralph's involvement in the lucrative Esplanade project. Phil's beating, meanwhile, was inconvenient to everyone, especially Phil, so it was simply ignored. And let's not forget the core hypocrisy.
Point is, how the fuck is this my problem?
Tony Soprano may be bound by the same rules as every other boss, but as far as he's concerned, he is the rules. When you're the man calling the shots, you don't follow the code, you redefine it. As long as no one important gets embarrassed and no one useful gets killed, the Mafia's code of conduct remains what it has always been, a set of sacred commandments carved into wet cement. This is what happens when you give a bitter old man a crown and call it leadership. Phil Leotardo's final arc is less a story of a man ascending to power than a cautionary tale about what happens when a lifetime of resentment is handed a crown. For a man who spent 2 decades in prison, supposedly marinating in the values of this thing of ours,
20 years inside, not a fucking peep.
Phil emerges not enlightened, but embittered, convinced the world owes him restitution for the years he lost and the blood he's buried. His transformation from a grudging ally to Tony Soprano into an immovable adversary wasn't a sudden heel turn. It was the inevitable result of a man who never forgave and never forgot, despite pretending otherwise. In earlier episodes, Phil tolerated Tony, even worked smoothly alongside him when Johnny Sack was in charge. But once Johnny was out of the picture and Phil inherited the throne, albeit reluctantly, the mask slipped. He was no longer interested in diplomacy or partnership. The moment he had power, he used it not to lead, but to punish. And let's not pretend the reasons weren't laid out. Phil gives them to us with theatrical clarity. His brother Billy is murdered, his grief unresolved, the vendetta left half done.
Vito. He was found beat to death this morning in a motel in Fort Lee.
Then there's the Vito situation, which Phil viewed not just as a personal affront, but a cosmic joke on the old school values he clung to like a relic.
We decapitate and we do business with whatever's left. Forget Coco. Forget Fat Dom.
Fat Dom is sent back to New York in a body bag, and instead of measured retaliation, Phil chooses a scorched earth policy. As he sees it, Jersey violates the sacred code at every turn, Tony being the chief offender.
Where you gonna go, huh?
And of course, Tony once ran him off the road and beat him while he lay injured, which is hardly the stuff of lasting alliances.
I fucking compromised everything.
Nah, what are you talking about?
Phil's no compromises monologue isn't about honor. It's a tantrum dressed up as principle. He invokes tradition, respect, and legacy, but it's all camouflage for the one emotion truly driving him: contempt. Contempt for Tony, contempt for New Jersey, contempt for the modern world. His bitterness is given sacred status, and anyone who questions it is dismissed as weak or misguided. One of the most telling scenes is during a celebration with his large extended family. Phil sits quietly, stewing, while reminiscing about all the old New York heavyweights who are now gone. Carmine Sr., Johnny Sack, Billy. The implication is clear. He sees himself as the last real man standing among fools and cowards. It's because they're stupid, that's why, he snaps. Not just about the living, but also the dead. Even Butch, who tries to offer warmth and camaraderie, can't pierce the fog of Phil's misanthropy.
And that was our name originally, Leonardo.
Then there's the name, Leotardo. Not a detail he ever lets go. At Ellis Island, his family name was changed from Leonardo to the now ridiculed Leotardo. This, in Phil's mind, is not a footnote. It's a cosmic insult. He carries it like a generational wound, as though that bureaucratic typo is emblematic of every humiliation he's ever suffered. And like any petty tyrant, he turns that wound outward. Ultimately, Phil becomes a caricature of himself. He's not just a man on a mission, he's a walking vendetta. Even his physicality starts to mirror his mindset. Stiff, unyielding, incapable of bending without breaking. The show gives us the metaphor literally. Tony describes him as not sitting at 12 o'clock. Phil has become a house, and as we know, you can't negotiate with a house. It's worth acknowledging, Phil did do 20 years without flipping. That's more than can be said for the likes of Pussy, Ray, Eugene, or Adriana. But he returns from prison only to conclude he served time for a generation of men unworthy of his loyalty. The mentors and brothers he respected are gone, and what's left is a leadership vacuum filled with posturing fools. But instead of rising above it, Phil chooses to double down on rigidity and revenge. Tony Soprano may have been a deeply flawed boss, but Phil Leotardo was a terrible leader. Because leadership requires more than anger and memory. It requires vision. And all Phil could see was the past. The Sopranos isn't about crime. It's about emotional repression. And nobody wants to talk about that. Eugene PontiCorvo dies early and quietly in The Sopranos, and in doing so, he delivers the show's loudest message. His storyline isn't just tragic, it's diagnostic, a blueprint. It's the purest articulation of what David Chase was really doing under all the mob iconography, gunfire, and garroted snitches.
People use it as a crutch. And I always wonder what happened to Gary Coop with it.
Because despite its branding, The Sopranos was never truly a show about organized crime. It was a show about emotional disorganization, weaponized silence, and the slow rot that happens when people can't say what they mean.
We buy a vacation place in Florida, a condo.
Gene wants out. Out of the life, out of the violence, out of the duplicity. He wants to protect his wife and child, and tragically comes to believe the only way to do that is to vanish from their lives entirely. It's not a failure of morality or loyalty. It's a failure of communication. He and his wife love each other, allegedly, but there's a chasm between them that neither one knows how to name, much less bridge. He speaks in desperation. She hears betrayal. She pleads in fear. He registers blame. The result is fatal. This is not an isolated case. In fact, once you spot it, the pattern is mercilessly consistent. Every key character is being slowly devoured by an inability to articulate their inner life. Tony Soprano talks incessantly, but honesty never makes it into his monologues. Carmela cries, sighs, seethes, but seldom actually communicates.
Clipping a famous rat would put me a cunt hair away from being made.
Christopher Moltisanti spirals because he mistakes a need for validation as a cause for rage and addiction. Even the interfamily war between New York and New Jersey hinges less on power and territory and more on the stubborn refusal of egos to speak plainly. Phil Leotardo, the great immovable wall of pride, meets his end because compromise is an alien concept to him.
Little Carmine's lined up a meet in LA for us.
Meanwhile, the only man in the entire series who understands the value of communication, Little Carmine, is treated like a walking punchline. The irony is rich. The fool turns out to be the only emotionally fluent adult in the room. This is Chase's real thesis. The violence, the betrayals, the breakdowns, they're all symptoms. The disease is emotional illiteracy. These men don't suffer because the mafia is dangerous. They suffer because they are incapable of making themselves understood, even to the people they love. Especially to the people they love. That's why Gene's arc is so quietly devastating. His suicide is not just a plot point, it's a prototype. It's the spiritual dry run for the show's infamous finale. When Gene hangs himself, the world goes dark for him. When Tony looks up from that onion ring, the world goes dark for us. The abrupt cut to black isn't a clever gimmick or an ambiguous ending. It's a thematic full stop. A death not of body, but of understanding. Nothing more needs to be said, because nothing ever was. David Chase didn't write a mob show. He wrote a psychological autopsy. A slow, masterful excavation of denial, repression, and the violence that blooms when people refuse to name the truth of their experience. Every rewatch peels back another layer, not because the plot changes, but because the viewer does. The older you get, the more clearly you see how these people are not just trapped by crime, they're trapped by themselves, their own fears, their own silence. And if Chase brings even a fraction of that emotional depth to his upcoming MK Ultra project for HBO, the result won't just be extraordinary, it'll be excruciating in the best possible way. Because he doesn't write stories, he writes postmortems. Eugene PontiCorvo inherited $2 million and still managed to be the most trapped man in New Jersey.
She left me an inheritance, Tone.
Just over $2 million.
Why would Eugene PontiCorvo, freshly minted made man, midlife malaise in full swing, decide to confess to Tony Soprano that he just inherited a cool $2 million in cash? A sum that, while not quite kingmaker money, still dwarfed the average American's net worth in the early 2000s. Even by mob standards, it's a significant windfall, the kind that should be handled with stealth and strategy, not blurted out to a boss whose default setting is suspicion. For context, Tony's own net worth hovered somewhere south of $6 million. Not destitute, but certainly not untouchable, especially when compared to a subordinate suddenly sitting on 7 figures of untraceable, tax-free money. So why exactly would Eugene put a target on his own back? The answer lies somewhere between desperation and delusion. Gene's dream of retiring to Florida was just that, a fantasy he indulged in while ignoring every flashing warning sign around him.
Hey, by the way, your Florida thing.
Did he really expect Tony, famously petty and deeply insecure, to hear, "I'm rich and want out," and simply shake his hand?
Did Tony mention anything to you about what we talked about?
More likely, Tony would treat that money as his own by divine right, and bleed Eugene dry through endless taxes, tributes, and business opportunities until the inheritance was little more than a distant memory. What Gene should have done, had he possessed an ounce of cunning, was pitch Tony a Florida-based expansion, offer $100,000 to grease the wheels of a new operation, promise fat envelopes and tropical visits, and maybe even drag Beansy into the mix to lend legitimacy. It would appeal to Tony's ego, flatter his illusions of empire, and most importantly, keep Gene out of the crosshairs. Tony trusted Beansy, one of the few civilians who passed for clean in his blood-soaked orbit. Using that relationship as cover would have been smarter than confessing financial independence to a man who considers autonomy a threat. Of course, all of this ignores the more pressing issue, the FBI.
We talked about Florida, okay?
Eugene wasn't just trying to escape Tony's grip. He was also an informant under government surveillance. And they made it abundantly clear, he wasn't going anywhere. PontiCorvo was a man caught between two unforgiving masters, neither of whom believed in happy endings. Even if he'd managed to placate Tony, he had no exit strategy from the feds. They owned him, body and wire. Which makes his ultimate decision, suicide, as tragic as it was inevitable. It was the only path that ensured his family could start over somewhere new, unburdened by the mob or the bureau. He wasn't trying to win, he was trying to disappear.
Let me tell you something. Fucking Vito, through sheer hard work, turned himself into my best earner.
The irony is that he may not have even needed to die. Had he simply vanished, Belgium, Belize, the Berkshires, it's unclear whether Tony would have hunted him down. The man barely flinched when Vito skipped town. As long as Eugene stayed gone and didn't make a scene, Tony might have let him drift into the ether. But Eugene, bless his tormented heart, still believed in the chain of command. He was recently made, not yet jaded, and too entangled in the rituals of respect to just walk away. That, combined with a wife drunk on real estate fantasies and FBI handlers tightening the screws, left him exactly where Tony wanted all his men, trapped. Gene never had a chance. But what's most damning is that he thought he did. Tony Blundetto is the biggest narrative cheat in The Sopranos, and no one wants to admit it. In a show as meticulously crafted as The Sopranos, one wouldn't expect characters to materialize from the narrative ether without so much as a breadcrumb trail.
I'll make this fast, because I know you're all hungry.
And yet, enter Tony Blundetto, a major character in Season 5, who seems to have teleported in from a writer's brainstorm session, not from the Soprano family tree we thought we knew. Or did he? Sharp-eyed obsessives might recall a blink-and-you-miss-it reference, buried in Season 3, Episode 6. Amid Carmela's scolding of AJ in a post-Meadow has sex with a Hasidic boy moment,
AJ, call Lindsay Blundetto.
She instructs him to call Lindsay Blundetto. No Lindsay is ever seen on screen, and the name is never mentioned again. But for purists desperate to believe that Tony B wasn't a narrative curveball, this reference might feel like a buried treasure, a feeble thread of continuity retroactively woven into the show's sprawling genealogy. Of course, invoking Lindsay Blundetto doesn't automatically give Tony B a satisfying backstory.
Anytime somebody steps in a pile of shit, you will be known as a Blundetto.
It reeks more of the writers throwing Italian surnames around like confetti, hoping viewers might confuse disorganized familiarity for depth. Lindsay might be related to Uncle Pat, Aunt Quinn, Chrissy's mother Louise, or someone else in the periphery of Tony's extended family, second cousin, in-law, or imaginary friend. Nothing about her mention meaningfully supports or even hints at the introduction of a major player like Tony Blundetto.
I was away when all that shit went down with you.
Let's not pretend the show is above off-screen interactions. Vito managed quite a bit off-camera before his spotlight season, but using that as a blanket justification for character gaps is lazy. If the writers truly wanted to sell Tony B as integral to Tony Soprano's past, they might have invested more than a single line tossed into a domestic squabble 3 seasons prior. Even the show's internal logic wobbles under scrutiny.
It's called April the acting boss for a 74-year-old.
The Sopranos hammers in the concept of the DeMeo crime family from season 1, complete with the assertion that Tony, Jackie, and Junior are all rotating through leadership while the old man sits in prison. The implication is that these characters operate within a tight-knit, observable hierarchy. So where exactly were all these Blendettos hiding while the major players were jostling for power? If the family dynamics are so important,
Yes, you still got the 4 other families who could raise a stink.
why aren't we seeing more of the kind of strategic nepotism Phil Leotardo engages in when he uses Johnny Sack's brother-in-law as a mouthpiece? In short, the mention of Lindsay Blendetto doesn't validate Tony B's sudden emergence. It merely underscores the show's occasional reliance on sleight of hand and surname bingo to distract from narrative gaps. A name drop isn't world building, it's window dressing. And in this case, the window leads to a room that never existed. What if Jackie Aprile Jr. wasn't named after his father, but after a jacket? In the ever-expanding mythology of The Sopranos, there's always room for one more absurd theory. Enter the notion that Jackie Aprile Jr.'s name is short for jacket. Yes, jacket. Because nothing says mafia legacy like naming your child after a piece of outerwear.
It's the jacket!
The story goes like this. The Aprile family, allegedly so enamored with Richie Aprile's deranged monologue about the jacket, decided to immortalize the moment by christening a child in its honor.
It's your fucking jacket.
Not content with simply retelling the Rocco DeMeo jacket saga at every Sunday dinner, the Apriles, in this version of reality, canonize Richie's fashion trauma by birthing Jackie, as in Jack-et, Aprile Jr. Naturally, the theory spirals.
It's a jacket.
Jackie and Richie, imagined here as sartorial philosophers, spend their days reflecting on Rocco's ill-fated coat.
But I thought you were dead.
Then, in a climactic show of reverence, Jackie announces his unborn son's name to his older brother. Rick, to honor you, I'm naming my firstborn son the Jacket. A tearful tribute, a family tradition, a legacy stitched into the very fabric of North Jersey mob culture.
Dash, I noticed that you lit 2 candles for Jackie and Jackie Jr., right?
As for Junior being short for Juniorelli, a nice touch of faux Italian flourish, as if the Aprile family moonlighted as characters in an off-brand Mario Puzo parody. Of course, none of this is grounded in even a whisper of canon, but it's poetic in the most ridiculous way. If nothing else, it underscores a central truth of the Sopranos universe. Absurdity and tragedy walk hand in hand, and sometimes they wear the same jacket. Carmela Soprano isn't misunderstood. She's manipulative, condescending, and worse than half the mobsters. There's something uniquely insufferable about Carmela Soprano's brand of performative righteousness, like a rosary wrapped in $100 bills.
Boy is still in high school, and my daughter's in college.
Take her infamous backseat boast. My daughter's in college. She's not too far away, though. She's in New York City. Columbia, actually. The university. It's an Ivy League. The condescension is so thick, it could be cut with one of those silver cake knives she probably registered for at Bloomingdale's. She delivers this to Gloria Trillo, Tony's mistress, with all the subtlety of a brick. As if a Mercedes sales agent in northern New Jersey has never heard of Columbia University, just across the river no less. But to Carmela, life is a series of opportunities to validate her existence through proximity to prestige. Of course, Gloria isn't stupid. She's baiting Carmela with a remark about the School of Broadcasting, an underhanded jab. But Carmela, ever armed with denial and a curated sense of superiority, doesn't catch the nuance, or chooses not to. She prefers the fantasy where everyone is either beneath her or trying to climb to her level. It's safer that way. Then there's the Porsche Cayenne stunt. Carmela, amid Johnny Sack's incarceration and the Sack family's crumbling finances, decides to roll up to Ginny's house and flash her brand new car like it's a pair of earrings. Why? Because Angie Bonpensiero had just bought a Corvette outright. God forbid someone else be the more self-sufficient mob wife. And so, in an act of breathtaking pettiness, Carmela channels her insecurity into a luxury SUV. Cayenne, like the pepper, she says, just in case anyone mistook it for subtlety. It's moments like these that strip Carmela down to her barest truth. She despises other women who succeed without a man's dirty money. Ginny Sack should have slammed the door in her face. But Ginny, unlike Carmela, has class and a faithful husband, at least by mob standards. And then there's the final episode, where Hunter Scangarello makes a surprise reappearance. Once written off as Meadows' airheaded, meth-dabbling party friend, Hunter resurfaces in med school. Carmela's reaction? Thinly veiled contempt giving way to a frozen, brittle smile. It's not pride, it's horror. Because Hunter's success demolishes the central myth Carmela clings to, that people can't change, that they don't grow, that everyone is fundamentally static and broken, just trying to look better than the next disaster. But here's Hunter, walking proof that transformation is possible. And that possibility deeply threatens someone who's built her identity on moral resignation. The show drives this point home relentlessly. The mob world is stagnant. Christopher starts the series as Tony's driver wearing a baseball cap and dies in the same role, the only difference being the branded merchandise. Despite the drugs, the script writing, the promotions, he never actually changes, and neither does Carmela. She's offered a lifeline in one of the most blistering episodes of the series, her confrontation with the psychiatrist who dares to call out her complicity. Not just in Tony's crimes, but in the entire corrupt ecosystem she's chosen to protect. "You've been told," he says, and he's right. She's been handed the truth and she flinches, then folds herself right back into her fret sheets. Even her attempts at manipulation are cringeworthy.
You better watch your step.
Consider the sexual coercion of Mr. Wegler, AJ's guidance counselor. She seduces him not out of desire, but as a transactional tool to improve her son's grades. When he sees through her, she doesn't apologize, she warns him. You better watch your step. The mafia wife's velvet glove comes off, revealing the steel fist underneath.
Oh, I love the coziness.
Her elitism also oozes out in small, telling comments. The bucko's new home? "Oh, I love the coziness," she remarks, dripping with patronizing disgust. Her obsession with objects, the $3,000 statue, the trade secret lasagna with sweet sausage and basil, the spec house, acts as a smokescreen for her emotional bankruptcy. At this point, her biggest achievement is pretending it's not all crumbling beneath her foundation-powdered facade. Then, of course, there's the line that somehow manages to be both absurd and stomach-turning. When Tony stirs in bed and she asks, "You want sex?" Delivered with all the enthusiasm of someone offering to take out the trash. That moment alone should be studied in acting schools.
You know, my teacher says it's a gay book.
Mr. Wegler?
Let's not forget her defensive lecture about Billy Budd over dinner with Meadows' college friends. "I'm sorry, but Billy Budd is not a homosexual book," she declares, flustered, as though Herman Melville himself were about to sue her for defamation. It's laughably transparent. Her panic at any suggestion that her limited worldview might be incomplete, let alone outdated. Yet through it all, the brilliance of Edie Falco's performance is undeniable. Every strained smile, every condescending remark, every clipped, breathy protest, all of it builds a character who says more in silence than most do in a monologue. Carmela Soprano is one of the most finely crafted female characters ever put to screen. Not because she's admirable, but because she is disturbingly real. A woman who chooses comfort over conscience, appearance over authenticity, and complicity over change. And the worst part? She knows it. Subscribe.